Welcome to the Vaughan Nelson Podcast. Today is the first quarter 2025 Vaughan Nelson Global SMid Recap. And with me today is Portfolio Manager Jim Eisenman. And with that, Jim, we'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Dan. The performance of global equity markets diverged in the first quarter, with a sell-off in U.S. markets, while equity markets outside the U.S. generally produced positive returns led by Europe, Japan, and South America. The U.S. market was pressured by declining liquidity, outflows of capital being repatriated by foreign investors, and negative sentiment around the U.S. focus on reducing federal spending and increasing revenues through tariffs. During the first quarter, both the portfolio and the benchmark produced negative returns as volatility picked up late in the quarter. The portfolio outperformed the benchmark on a relative basis, with stock selection in the United States, Japan, and Mexico contributing the most to the relative outperformance. These positives were partially offset by negative stock selection in the UK and Canada. Early in the first quarter, we continued taking profits in our technology names, redeploying that capital into several new positions with idiosyncratic stories and attractive payoff profiles. Given the amount of uncertainty around tariffs, trade policy, and taxes in the U.S., and ongoing geopolitical uncertainty, we are not significantly overweight any one factor or theme in the portfolio. We prefer to be generally factor neutral and prepared to take advantage of attractive opportunities as they present themselves over the next 1 to 2 quarters. During the quarter, we continued to find opportunities in both undervalued earnings growth and undervalued asset names. The current portfolio is well balanced between these two categories with a tilt towards undervalued growth. As we entered 2025, we expected market volatility to increase, and that has certainly played out. We expect equity markets to remain volatile until the back half of the year. By then, we should have resolution around future U.S. tax rates and trade policies. This will provide the visibility needed for private sector investment to increase and for economic growth to improve. We believe that capital controls and fiscal policy expansion outside of the U.S. will continue to drive foreign investors to repatriate capital away from the U.S. This dynamic should be a positive for liquidity outside the U.S., but the impact on local equity prices within specific markets may vary widely. The longer-term outlook for inflation and growth at the country level will be driven by each country's geopolitical, monetary, and fiscal policy choices as the bilateral relationships between countries are reset. While there will be winners and losers, the changes happening now should set up some very attractive opportunities for our portfolio over the next several years. With that, I'll turn it back to Dan.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, Jim. We'll now take a peek at returns in the first quarter of 2025. The Vaughan Nelson Global SMid strategy returned negative 1.09% gross, negative 1.32 net. And that's against the MSCI All Country SMid Index at negative 1.71%. Over the past year, the Vaughan Nelson Global SMid strategy returned negative 2.37 gross, negative 3.25 net, versus the MSCI All Country SMid Index at 1.74%. Over the past 3 years, 1.54% gross for the Vaughan Nelson Global SMid strategy, 0.63% net, and that's against the MSCI All Country SMid Cap Index at 2.48%. And finally, since inception, the Vaughan Nelson Global SMid strategy has returned 11.84% gross, 10.84% net, and the MSCI All Country SMid Cap Index is at 9.32%. With that, Jim, that's a wrap on the first quarter. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again after the second.
Thanks, Dan.
The views, information, and/or opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Vaughan Nelson and its employees. Vaughan Nelson does not verify and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy of any of the information contained in the podcast. The primary purpose of the information, opinions, and thoughts presented in this podcast is to educate and inform. This podcast, or any podcast in the series, does not constitute professional investment advice or services, and any reliance on the information provided is done at your own risk. Past performance is not an indication of future performance. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the entire contents of this podcast are the property of Vaughan Nelson or used by Vaughan Nelson with permission, and are protected under U.S. copyright and trademark laws.
Securities discussed within this podcast may be held in the Vaughan Nelson strategies.